A little over 900 days ago, I built this tank for a rare species of vampire crab. At the time, people told me it wouldn't last, but more than 900 days later, the tank is still going, and it has changed quite a bit along the way. I previously built dozens of landscape-style tanks for various species of vampire crabs, but this was my first attempt at building a vertical ecosystem for an arboreal species. These crabs prefer to spend most of their time up in the canopy rather than down on the ground, so I wanted to create something that really took advantage of that vertical space. For the tank, I chose an Exoterra small extra tall, which gave me a ton of height and plenty of room to create something really unique. Rather than building everything out of spray foam like most people do, I wanted to try something different. My goal was to use as little plastic and artificial material as possible, and instead build the entire thing around natural materials, or as close as I possibly could. At the time, there were plenty of people who thought it wouldn't last, so I guess this is where we find out how well it went. Because I wanted the tank to be visible from as many sides as possible, without the door braces getting in the way, I decided to build the background on one of the sides, rather than across the back. This made things a little more complicated, but it's not as difficult as you might think. I started by gluing some of the cork panels and adding a small conduit for the waterfall pump, tubing and electrical cable to run through. I then covered everything with random pieces of cork and carved them back to make the whole thing look a lot more natural and layered. Next, I built a small box to house the pump and started working on the base of the tank. At this point, I was planning on having a fairly substantial water section at the bottom, but I also wanted to give the crabs somewhere else to access water, so I added a small pool at the very top of the tank as well. Then I started decorating the entire background using cork bark and cork tubes. Some of these were positioned to create a channel for the waterfall to run down the center of the tank. And rather than gluing or foaming everything into place, I pinned it all together using bamboo skewers. Once the basic structure was finished, I covered most of the background with a layer of clay and started filling the whole thing with plants and moss. A little while later, I added a cleanup crew and finally the crabs. And for the first few months, everything seemed to work perfectly. But then I noticed something strange. After about 6 months of watching them, I realized that the crabs had not once entered the water by choice. Occasionally one would get thrown into the water section during a fight, way up in the canopy, but the second it hit the water, the first thing it would do was climb straight back out. So despite spending all that time building the water section, the crabs basically wanted nothing to do with it. And if they weren't going to use it, there wasn't much point in keeping it. So I removed the entire water section and replaced it with a sandy layer that could still function well as a drainage layer. I also happened to have a ton of Monte Carlo trimmings left over from an old aquascape, so I threw those in there as well, and they absolutely took off. Within a relatively short amount of time, it formed a really nice green carpet across the bottom of the tank. Even though I removed the main water section and kept the upper pool, the water still collected in various parts of the tank, giving the crabs plenty of opportunities and places to hydrate themselves. And then after a few months after making that change, something really cool happened. The crabs started breeding, which as far as I was concerned was a pretty good indication that the changes had worked very well. Unlike most other vampire crab species, Notophorum carry their eggs on their back, which is kind of a little bit creepy, but it's also super interesting to watch. And over the following year, we started to see more and more babies. At the same time though, the original males gradually aged out, and unfortunately some were lost between fights with each other. The males of this species are considerably more aggressive than any of the other vampire crab species, so having a really large tank with plenty of space is super important if you're planning on keeping a few extra males. Sometimes it's unavoidable anyway. Unfortunately, this was something I learned the hard way because most other vampire crab species are nowhere near this aggressive, though they do like to fight sometimes. Then on day 783, I had another really big problem. I had to move the entire tank to a new apartment, and this wasn't exactly ideal timing. It was one of the coldest winters we'd had in years, the elevator was out, and somehow I had to get this entire glass tank with everything inside it across town and up a couple of flights of stairs. So I wrapped the tank in blankets, put it on a trolley and moved it across town. And somehow, not a single thing moved during transport, and even more importantly, all of the crabs survived the temporary cold spell. And honestly, I think the way that the tank was constructed had a lot to do with that. After almost 2 years of growth, the roots from the vining plants and mosses had completely locked everything together in place, so it couldn't really move anywhere. The entire background had become so densely rooted that there was almost no chance of anything coming apart, which, considering people originally told me that the design wouldn't last, was pretty satisfying to see. And now, after a little over 900 days, you can see that the tank has changed quite a bit. I've added and removed a whole bunch of different plants over the years. Some of the plants at the bottom became so big they started blocking light and caused the plants underneath them to die back. Others grew much faster and much bigger than I would have thought possible in such a short period of time. Like the pitcher plant I had in there for a while, it went absolutely nuts, and I eventually had to give it its own home. And although it's difficult to keep track of how many we've had, we've now seen 3 generations of babies come through the tank, with a slow but steady turnover of new ones every so often. At the moment, I don't have any plans to break down this tank and start something new, although ironically, its new position in my new studio has actually made it a little trickier to maintain. I added a new shelf beside it, which means I no longer have full access to one of the sides where the door is. But thankfully it's not that much of an issue, because at this point I only have to do proper maintenance on the tank maybe once a month or so, if that. The only things I do every week are feed the crabs and top up the water. Everything else is pretty much automated. So after more than 900 days, would I build this tank exactly the same again? And the answer is yes. Though there are a few little things I would tweak just to accommodate this species of crab a little bit better from the start. And despite all of the changes that I've made and moving apartments with this tank, it's become one of the lowest maintenance ecosystems that I've ever built, which is pretty damn good considering most people said it wouldn't last.